What's going on, Headliner Nation? Welcome back to the Fantasy Headliners. Kyle here with my waiver wire targets for Week 9 of the NFL season. Got a lot of guys to talk about, a lot of guys that you should be targeting and getting onto your roster this week. Again, to help with any of the buys that you might have coming up, any injuries you might be dealing with, or just all around ineffective play as we continue to work through 2020 and one of the craziest NFL seasons we have ever seen. And fantasy football owners sure are feeling some of the pressure of that crazy season. So let's go ahead and jump into running backs first and foremost. And the number one running back up this week, Zach Moss, 30% owned. I'm still not a big Zach Moss fan. I still don't think he is the type of guy that you're going to be able to plug and play every single week, and a guy that's going to give you even like running back 2 type numbers every single week. Him and Devin Singletary are going to be splitting a lot. And keep in mind, this past week, even though Zach Moss looked good, Devin Singletary looked just as good, averaged more yards on the ground. The biggest difference, though, is that Zach Moss got the 2 goal line carries. And that's why we're taking a look at adding him this week. If you're a Devin Singletary owner and you have an extra spot on your bench, you might want to think about picking up Zach Moss right now in case he does start to take a little bit more of the workload over the coming weeks. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think him and Singletary are going to continue to split a lot of the work, and they're just going to hamper each other. Now, if Singletary were to have an injury, then at that point, Zach Moss becomes a guy we need to have more shares of. So going up against Seattle next week, he's at 30% owned right now. He's the guy you should be taking a look at. Damian Harris, 25% owned. He goes 16 for 102 and 1 against Buffalo. I mean, a tough matchup, right? And he goes out there and he gets that yardage even when they were behind the entire game. And now imagine what's going to happen when he goes up against the New York Jets in Week 9. He's going to potentially have an even bigger week. He's averaged over 5 yards per carry in 3 of the last 4 weeks, and he seems to be the main guy on the ground. He is the guy that's has been getting a majority of the carries. Now, in PPR leagues, he's not going to add a whole lot through the passing game, so his weekly ceiling isn't going to be a whole lot, but if he's continuing to get between 15 and 20 carries a week, and he can get right around 100 yards per week, he's a guy that you definitely could put in your flex and be just fine with because the volume's going to be there. J.K. Dobbins at 35% owned going up against Indianapolis. Indianapolis absolutely just tortured the Lions' run game this past week. So even thinking about J.K. Dobbins this week, understand that number one, Evan Ingram could be back, or not Evan Ingram, excuse me, Mark Ingram could be back. Mark Ingram could be back, and that basically puts J.K. Dobbins' touches right out the window at that point. But it's a tough matchup as well. Gus Edwards is still there. They might have to pass the ball a little bit more. So J.K. Dobbins, just understand if you're adding him this week, there's nothing guaranteed. But when you go 113 yards on 15 carries, and there's, again, the thought process or the assumption that potentially Mark Ingram is out again next week, J.K. Dobbins appears to me to be the number one guy if Ingram isn't playing. Nyheim Hines from Indianapolis going up against Baltimore at 26.4% owned. Really got back into the passing game last week. Had a great move on the sideline. If you missed that, a pass down the sideline, a nice spin move, dives into the end zone. Really just an excellent play by Hines there. But that's some of that shiftiness. That's some of those playmaking abilities that Hines has that a lot of people don't really get a chance to see because he's not showcased. Now, after the game, I know a lot of people are upset about Jonathan Taylor. But after the game, Phillip Rivers mentioned in the postgame interview, he might be banged up a little bit. I don't know what that means. I mean, it's not like we thought he was going to be out or anything like that. So I don't know what banged up, air quotes, means. But with that being said, maybe we do see Hines a little bit more going up against Baltimore if Indianapolis is having trouble staying ahead of them, or if Indianapolis is having to throw the ball a little bit more, if the run game isn't working. Nyheim Hines is a guy that definitely could be in the backfield more often. He does get 3 receptions for 52 yards and 2 touchdowns this past week. Again, coming up in a PPR league, there's a lot worse plays out there. He's not a guy that I'm going to invest in for the season, though. He's kind of a filler right now. At the beginning of the year, a lot of people, especially after that week 1, jumped on board and thought he was a guy that was going to have value all season long. And we were cautious of that, right? You know, with the guys that were there, even with Marlon Mack going down with that injury, Wilkins there as well. And we saw plenty of work from Wilkins. Now, the reason I'm not adding Wilkins here in terms of picking him up is because, again, Nyheim Hines could have that standalone value as a pass catcher. Even though Wilkins looked better than Jonathan Taylor this past week, again, tough matchup coming up with Baltimore, and you have to, assume if Jonathan Taylor is really banged up and he's better next week, he starts to get more touches. So I'm not buying into Wilkins at this point. I don't have anything against him. I think, honestly, if he was on another team, he'd be a Jordan Howard-esque type of player. Unfortunately, he's just not getting that type of work here in Indianapolis when everybody's healthy. So we'll monitor that, but because Hines has standalone value as a pass catcher, that's why I'm targeting him. Justin Jackson from the Los Angeles Chargers going up against the Las Vegas Raiders, 33.9% owned. And some people lost faith after last week. And last week, I mean week 7 and not week 6. Or excuse me, week 7, not week 8. So 2 weeks ago, okay? Some people lost faith after that game, okay? But this past week, he comes back, 20 touches and 142 total yards against Denver. Really kind of establishing himself again as being the main guy. Okay. And he was even potentially a little bit banged up, maybe feeling better now, which is good. 142 total yards on 20 touches tells me he's healthy. Okay. So going up against Las Vegas, Justin Jackson, a guy that I really like owning and really like taking a shot at that this week. DJ Dallas from the Seattle Seahawks. Last week mentioned his name alongside Carlos Hyde, but at the time of the recording last week, Carlos Hyde, there was nothing saying that he was hurt. All of a sudden, we dropped the video on Tuesday. A few hours later, Carlos Hyde is hurt, and at that point, we're like, yeah, you got to pivot to DJ Dallas. And even in the start and sit shows this week, even in the live show, we talked about DJ Dallas, and we said, yeah, absolutely could be a guy that could help you out, but because it's a 4 o'clock game, Carson's basically 50-50 at this point. Well, for those of you that stuck with him and played him, 58 total yards on 23 touches and gets you a couple touchdowns. That's the biggest thing there. Got you a couple touchdowns. Really a big help. Now, is he going to have a bigger role? It's possible moving forward he could. Again, tough matchup going up against Buffalo. However, Damian Harris just went against Buffalo and had 102 rushing yards on the ground. So maybe DJ Dallas can help us out again a little bit this week, but it's all going to depend on Carlos Hyde and Chris Carson over the next week. So that's a big thing at this point, is keeping an eye on them and seeing what happens. I think a lot of people are going to be running out to add DJ Dallas, but it's really hard to do that not knowing about Carson and Hyde at this point. And then JaMycal Hasty from the San Francisco 49ers, 31% owned. He gets Green Bay this week. Green Bay just gave up 489 total yards to Dalvin Cook on the ground with 56 touchdowns. Okay, that's exaggerating a little bit, but that's what it felt like, because Dalvin Cook ran all over them and absolutely torched them. Going into that game, they allowed the most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, and then, Cook goes out and basically does the same exact thing. So JaMycal Hasty was the clear leader on the ground this past week. He saw the volume on the ground. If he's going to be the starter going into this game against Green Bay, he is absolutely 100% at least a running back 3 in a flex play. Because if Dalvin Cook can go off for that many touches again, or that many yards against Green Bay, and Green Bay's been awful against the run game all year long, I mean, you're looking at a floor of JaMycal Hasty of at least having probably, again, around 15 to 20 touches on the ground. And on top of that, he could put up anywhere between 80 and 110 yards. Perfect. That's what we want from a flex play. Give us some volume, give him some yards, and he could get into the end zone. So again, great matchup for him this week. Clear leader on the ground last week. Obviously a guy that we should be taking a shot at moving into week 9. All right, we're moving on to wide receiver now, and the first name up on the wide receiver list is going to be Curtis Samuel, 4% owned, and honestly, I'm not that excited to run out and add him right now. Basically, what you're looking at is adding the current number 3 option on this team, and who will become number 4 as soon as Christian McCaffrey is back. But again, if you're dealing with a lot of buys, if you're dealing with injuries, if you need some depth, whatever it may be, they are going up against Kansas City this coming week, which is going to lead to obviously more pass catching opportunities. Now, over the last 3 weeks, Curtis Samuel has averaged 5.3 targets per game, and he's caught all but one of them. So the efficiency right now, very good. He's catching everything coming his way. He's had the same volume as the previous weeks last week. However, he does get into the end zone twice this past week. He adds that rushing touchdown on top of that receiving touchdown. Now, this is the player that Curtis Samuel can be. However, the Panthers, for whatever reason, just haven't utilized that. And I don't know if that's just because they haven't been able to trust Curtis Samuel this year. If with Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore, there's just not enough targets to go around. Now we're getting Christian McCaffrey back. So again, I'm not excited to run out and add him this week, but I am listing him because if you're needing help at needing help on your bench, a little bit of depth, going up against Kansas City, definitely could be an opportunity for him, again, to get around 5 targets. And if he gets 5 targets, if he can catch all those, maybe he does put up 60 or 70 yards. And if he can find the end zone once again, then at that point, he becomes a guy that's a flex play. Will I probably start him? Probably not. But again, if anything happens throughout the week and we need to absolutely put him in the lineup, there's potentially worse options out there. Jacoby Myers, speaking of worse options, everyone from New England is a tough start right now. That's how we'll word it. But New England, Jacoby Myers, 0.1% owned, going up against the New York Jets. This past week goes 4 receptions on 6 targets for 60 yards. Now he gets the Jets. Edelman's hurt. Harry's hurt. Maybe Jacoby Myers is going to become that number 1 target for Cam Newton. We'll see how that plays out. But, there could be an opportunity. 4 receptions for 60 yards going up against the Jets. Maybe he builds on that a little bit. Can he get maybe 5 or 6 receptions? Can he get more up towards 80 or 85 yards? If he does, then at that point, he's a guy that might be worth holding on to. But with the injuries there, definitely something to keep an eye on. And with as bad as they've been, they're going to have to keep trying to pass the ball. And if, Cam Newton can figure it out a little bit, can maybe in the second half of the season get into a little bit better of a groove, maybe he does become a guy that we can flex every once in a while. Corey Davis, brought him up last week on the Waiver Wire show, and there was a few people out there that said, AJ Brown, AJ Brown's healthy. I don't know if we really need to add Corey Davis. Over the last 2 weeks, 20 targets, 14 receptions, 163 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Really tough matchup going up against Chicago this week. But obviously, A.J. Brown is going to get cornerback 1 coverage. That's going to hopefully leave Corey Davis to, again, I think this is good for Corey Davis. I think having A.J. Brown there is good for him. I don't necessarily think that Corey Davis is a guy that is really the wide receiver 1. Okay? I don't like that. Me personally, I think he's more of like a Greg Jennings. Okay, Greg Jennings is a guy that, he had some good years, but to me personally, if he's got someone there helping him out, if you've got a couple of different options there, it helps him excel a little bit. If he's not the focal point, it helps him do a little bit better. So with Corey Davis, definitely think that A.J. Brown being there, this has really helped him kind of break out and become the wide receiver that a lot of us thought he was in the draft. Denzel Mims from the New York Jets going up against New England. Will Gilmore end up being back next week? It is a tough matchup, but he is the big play guy for the New York Jets. 42 receiving yards on 2 receptions. And this past week, those came in the first quarter, and then he didn't do anything else the rest of the game, unfortunately. Hopefully against New England, he can be a little bit more consistent. Marvin Jones going up against Minnesota, 43% owned. The last couple of weeks, 8 receptions on 13 targets, 119 yards, 2 touchdowns. Those 2 touchdowns coming this past week. How long is Kenny G going to be out for? That's the question. Kenny G goes out in the second quarter this past week. It's a hip injury. Is it going to be something that's going to extend into next week? He does get Minnesota. Minnesota has had a tough time stopping the pass game this year. So Marvin Jones could be in line for a decent amount of targets heading into week 9. Darnell Mooney. Now this is more of a pick up and play this week type of move. This isn't necessarily a pick up and hold all season, even though you could and see what happens. This matchup this week is far too good for us to pass up. Darnell Mooney, 0.9% owned, going up against Tennessee, against New Orleans. 5 receptions on 6 targets, 69 yards, and a touchdown. And now he's going to be getting Tennessee, that allows the 3rd most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. We already know who's going to be getting the cornerback 1 coverage. It's Allen Robinson. This is allowing Darnell Mooney to get not only that quarterback 2 coverage, but it's also allowing him some of those big plays down the field because you've got Allen Robinson that does such a great job with the route tree all over the place. You've got to account for that. Jimmy Graham, even though, obviously this past week didn't do anything, but still kind of in those intermediate routes. And then again, trying to establish the run with David Montgomery, even though they do a horrible job of it, it allows Darnell Mooney some shots down the field, and they've taken those. And obviously, he could have had an even bigger week, but Nick Foles threw to the wrong shoulder. He was running straight down the field. Instead of hitting him on this side, he threw it on the side with the cornerback. So he didn't lead him as far as he should have, or it could have been an even bigger week against New Orleans. So a mishap there. But this is definitely a guy for me, Darnell Mooney, much so. He's going to be my Manscaped must-add of the week. That's right. We are partnered with Manscaped this year. If you head over to manscaped.com, you can get any of their awesome products for 20% off by using code word headliners, all capital letters, and you'll get free shipping with it as well. So Darnell Mooney, my must-add, my Manscaped must-add here heading into week 9 because he is a guy that could definitely go off and have a huge week. Brandon Ayuk, probably owned him in a majority of leagues, but for those of you in shallow leagues that maybe didn't go back and get him as of yet, he is just under 50% owned across multiple platforms. Okay, we take everything into consideration. Those aren't my numbers. Don't get mad at me. Those are the industry numbers. Nothing I can do about that. Going up against Green Bay, 891-1 last week as my Manscaped must start. That's who Brandon Ayuk was last week. No Debo again. We'll see. Debo might not be out there again. This helps his cause because Brandon Ayuk is in a position to stay away from Jair Alexander. Okay, Alexander, one of the best cornerbacks in the league, if not the best cornerback in the league, matched up with Justin Jefferson last week, which, what did I tell you all? I told you all that was going to happen, and he held him down. Now, the wind might have had something to do with that again, but Alexander is a very tough cornerback. But Ayuk is a guy that can be moved all over the field. Slot, into the backfield, out wide. They have an opportunity to keep him away from Alexander. That's why I'm still okay with him in this matchup against Green Bay. And then my boy Jalen Reagor. Oh, man. Love seeing him come back and score right away. Yes, I had him as a sit. I wanted to make sure that he was healthy. That was it. But if you've been following this channel, you know during the offseason, I was telling you all, Jalen Reagor was an absolute beast. He's going to be on a bye this week, which might benefit some of you because he's 13.5% owned. A lot of people probably forgot about him, moved away from him. And because he's on a bye, a lot of those owners might say, I don't need to add him this week. I need someone who's actually going to play this week, which is going to allow you to scoop in and grab him up. So add Jalen Reagor this week. Do not wait for next week. He's got that touchdown last week, but him and Fulgham moving forward definitely could be a great 1-2 punch for Carson Wentz. Only 3 tight ends to really talk about this week. Dallas Goedert, Darren Fells, Logan Thomas. And part of me is kind of looking at the matchups coming up, except for Dallas Goedert. Again, Dallas Goedert, talked about in my video last week. I tried to give you a heads up earlier in the week. Hey, he's trending towards being back. A lot of people were like, oh, Richard Rodgers is a smash this week. He's a must start, putting him in my lineup. And I tried to get you all to pump the brakes because Dallas Goedert was working his way back and it looked like he was going to be there. And absolutely, that's what ended up happening. He gets back in the lineup last week. Yeah, it doesn't get a whole lot of work, but they get the bye. So another week for him to get fully healthy. They get the bye to kind of get themselves ready and set for the rest of the season. I think this comes at a perfect time for the Eagles. So again, you'll have to get him this week because maybe we have some owners who bypass him or don't really worry about him this week because, hey, he's on a bye. I need somebody that can help right now. You grab him up and then you've got yourself a potential top 10 option at the tight end position the rest of the season. Darren Fells from Houston going up against Jacksonville this week, who allows the 6th most fantasy points per game. So Fells will be an option again for us this week at 5.7% owned. And Logan Thomas, who a lot of people have given up on, including myself. Okay, it's been a roller coaster with Logan Thomas this year. 2.1% owned. Now he gets the New York Giants. Over the last 2 games, he's caught 7 of 8 targets for 102 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he's definitely a guy that's kind of trending back towards being a focal point in that offense. offense. They're coming out of the bye this week, so they get a little bit of extra time to get themselves set, going up against the Giants, who haven't been, they've been a little bit stingy on the passing game this year for wide receivers. That could allow Logan Thomas to step in again, maybe some touchdown upside for you this week. All right, we're moving into the streaming portion of the waiver wire video. So if you're looking to stream a quarterback or a defensive team this next week, I've got a few options for you to do that as well. For the quarterbacks, I've got 3 options. And all 3 of the options I have listed are going up against the top 3 teams that allow the most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. So it kind of works out well for us this week that these 3 guys are going to be good streaming options. 2 of them are extremely low ownership percentage with Phillip Rivers and Drew Lock. Phillip Rivers giving up Seattle, they give up the most. Drew Lock going up against Atlanta, they give up the second most. Now, yes, Atlanta, they've played a lot better since they made the coaching change. The defense has looked a lot better as well. So, we'll be a little bit careful with it. Last week, going up against Carolina, really kind of held them down a little bit, but the weather wasn't the greatest either. With Drew Lock and Phillip Rivers, though, if you're needing to stream a quarterback this week, both of these guys could be just fine options. Now, are they going to go out and be a top 5 quarterback? Probably not. But they're going to get you some points this week, which really, if you're streaming, that's what you're looking for until your top cornerback comes back. And then for Derek Carr from Las Vegas, a little bit higher owned. He's right around 50%. He's played really well over the last few weeks. Now, again, weather, a little bit of the issue with this past week. So maybe some people look at only the box scores. We've had this conversation over the last week, Headliner Nation. If they're looking at only the box score, they say, oh, Derek Carr had a bad week. He's back to being the Derek Carr of old. I'm not saying that. Other people are saying that. I love Derek Carr. But they say that, and they're not interested in it, but he gets the Chargers, who allow the 3rd most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receiver or opposing quarterbacks, and this is a good option for you as well this week. So again, the top 3 quarterbacks we're looking at, all ownership percentages that allow them to be on this video, and they face the top 3 teams allowing the most fantasy points per quarterback. So this really is a good week for streaming QBs. Moving on to defensive teams, I've only got 2 defensive teams that we're taking a look at this week. Both of them decently owned in terms of ownership percentage, but probably still widely available in a lot of leagues. It's the Titans and the Cardinals. The Titans at 36% owned going up against Chicago. And even though I've got Darnell Mooney listed as a must-add, and he's a guy I definitely like this week, the Titans going up against a Bears offense that has the ability to struggle at times, right? We've seen it. They get off to a little bit of a slow start. They look a little bit better as the game goes on, but that could be good for the Titans. And if you're looking to stream an option this week, Tennessee, not a bad option going up against an offense that can be up and down and a little bit of a roller coaster at times. And then the Cardinals at 20% owned going up against Miami. Tua struggled in his first start. Now, nothing that makes me think he's a bust. Now, keep in mind, this is the guy's first start in over a year after having surgery that could have basically ended his career, okay? And now he's out on the football field. So it's a great story within itself, and he's going to end up being just fine. But, he's still working through some of that rust. He's working through some of those kinks. He's trying to get himself back to the Tua of old. He wasn't really that great this past week. Yeah, he had that touchdown pass to Devonta Parker. He was a little bit inconsistent at times, though. So going up against the Cardinals, a team that can bring a little bit of pressure, that can basically shut down the passing game at times as well, could be a good start going up against Miami this week, possibly force some turnovers or keep the yardage low. And for some of your formats, depending on how they go, basically you start with a certain amount of points, and then as the other team gains yards, your points go down. So the less yards they give up, the better for your defensive team, and I think that could be an option this week going up against Miami. There you go, headliners. There you have it, my waiver wire ads and targets for week 9. Do me a favor, hit that like button down below. Leave a comment as well. Is there anybody you're taking a look at that you didn't see on this video that you're wondering if you should be picking up? Let me know about that player down below in the comments. And as always, hit that subscribe button if you appreciate the content we're putting out. Just almost to 111,000, subscribers here on YouTube. So do us a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, leave us a comment down below, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners. See you later, Headliner Nation.